We are in the hands of someone who has an entire career's experience in a male-dominated workplace. She has worked her way up to Director of Customer and Operations for Openreach. So now to discuss what does the future look like, would you please welcome Carla Thomas.
I've got my notes. Okay, so I feel really old now because I have actually worked in a male-dominated industry for 30 years. So I currently work for BT Group. Does this clicker work? I'm not a tech. I'll talk a bit about me and my journey first off. So 30 years in telco, not a tech, a woman. I've got 3 kids. So they span in age from 23 to 9. We always wanted a third, but we waited a while to have him. I've had 2 husbands, not at the same time, and they're both called Michael, interestingly. Very useful, very useful. I was born just down the road. I come from a small mining village in the West Midlands. I didn't go to the right school. I didn't wear a signet ring, and I hadn't got a clue about what university was all about when it came to that point in my life. I really appreciate my life as well as my work. I really want work-life balance. I'm all in with everything that I do, but I can only be all in at work if I get a life. So I'm really wedded to that. So presenteeism is one of the things that I'll talk about that I think is quite prevalent in male-dominated environments. And I'm on the board of a small charity that helps women, actually. And I'm also on the board of the British Quality Foundation. So I've done all right, okay? I've done all right. I never planned it. It was never part of my aim, but I've done okay. And I'm just going to impart some wisdom today, if you can call it wisdom, and some hacks about how to thrive. And I've called it thriving in the noise, because one of the real characteristics of a male-dominated environment is it's noisier, I think. It's noisier than where there's more of a balance. So these are the factors, and this took me about 2 minutes to spit these out in terms of the factors that I've observed that I've found most challenging in a male-dominated environment. And this isn't to say, by the way, that men are bad or, it's not. It's just cultural facets that tend to exist in more male-dominated environments. Number 1, and this is the one that I don't like the most, particularly because I've had 3 kids, is presenteeism. I've got a colleague, a peer now, and by the way, I'm just about to leave telco and go into banking, so that's more of a mixed environment. So after 30 years, I'm going into something more mixed, not because it's male-dominated in BT, because I wanted a new intellectual challenge. But I've got a colleague, a current colleague, and he doesn't live with his partner, he lives on his own, and he hasn't got any kids. And he is online from 6:30 in the morning till 7 at night. And you can see him, he's always there, right? And I've got Teams on my phone and I can see he's just like always there. And when I first started working with him, I thought, shit, is this what I've got to do? I don't want to do that. I can't do that. I've got to actually give some of me to my dad who's ill, to my husband, to my kids, to my 4 animals. I've got a dog and 3 cats as well. I do have a lot of stuff going on. And I've got stuff that I need to do. So I thought, well, I can either try or I can carry on being me. And so I fight presenteeism everywhere I see it. It's not how many hours I do, it's what I do when I'm here. And what I do when I'm here is really good. So, I'm not going to reduce my salary to the minimum wage by working 60 hours a week. That isn't going to happen, right? That wouldn't be very clever of me in terms of running a business either. So I'm not going to do that. So I tackle presenteeism. And I've looked at the studies, right? These aren't just generalizations or my experience. Presenteeism exists more in male-dominated environments. The next one is noise, but get to the point. In new environments, in a male-dominated, particularly technical environment, I have often felt like I'm speaking Spanish and they're speaking French. I have not found easy ways to get myself heard, and that is something that women experience. And I think it was a Stanford review suggested that men are 34% more likely to interrupt a woman than they are to interrupt another man, right? So you have to figure, you could cry about it, you could get upset about it, but it exists. So what you've got to do is figure out ways to tackle it, to thrive despite the noise. And I'm going to give you some of those hints and tips as we move forward. Competitive. I find that the elbows are a little bit pointier in male-dominated environments, and the studies back it up, right? It's more individualistic. Women are more likely to collaborate and make great things happen as part of a big team. Men are more likely to say, look at me, aren't I brilliant? And we can't do anything about that, but we can learn how to make it work for us. And if you think about the environment right now, This is an environment where AI is going to take a lot of stuff. There's no getting around it. But the stuff that remains is the stuff that actually women have superpowers in. It's the stuff that requires nuance and empathy and judgment and tackles emotion. That stuff still exists. So when you think about the future, maybe it will be female-dominated environments. Who knows? And I don't dislike men, by the way. I've had 2 husbands. I really like men, but, you know. They value stoicism. Male-dominated environments, in my experience, and this is really relevant in Openreach, they don't want to see too much emotion, right? And there's this whole stuff, right, coming out of, like, California, bring your whole human self to work. And I absolutely philosophically agree with that. And so do all the men in my organisation, unless it involves somebody actually feeling some human stuff. They're not that keen on that, right? Another superpower that we have is that we're okay with emotion on the whole, right? We're used to dealing with emotion. So, and individualistic I've talked about. So these are the factors. I didn't just say Carla says. I went and looked it up. It's all backed up by research. Go and do a ChatGPT search later and you'll see it's all backed up by research. So I'm trying to now give you three coherent themes. And the last one is a bit of a call to arms, right? Because we've all got an accountability. But the first one is you belong here. And this is one of the things that I've really struggled with through my career, is this voice in my head that kind of says, hang on a minute, Carla, you dropped out of university, right? I have got an MBA now, but that was very late in life. Why are you at this table? And Jessica Ennis-Hill, I think, had the brilliant quote, which is, the only one who can tell you you can't win is you, and you don't have to listen. The biggest barrier that men and women face in feeling that their imposter syndrome is in the driving seat or otherwise is their own self-talk, okay? So the first person you've got to convince is you. She's nailed the biggest barrier to women and men, I think. So the first part of this, the cornerstone, is to tell yourself you're good enough. You are not at the table that you're at because somebody did you some favour, right? It's not how business works, whatever the business. You're there because of what you bring. So that's the first thing to get your head around. And I've got some hacks to help you do that, right? Because I'm just about to go into a banking environment and it keeps crossing my mind that I could fall on my ass, right? I could, right? Follow me on LinkedIn, you'll soon find out. And I may fall on my ass and I may not. I've got to do it anyway because I really want something new. But I kind of think, let's look at the evidence, okay? 30 years, my first job was in a contact centre. Oh, I didn't go through the pictures. We've got to go back. I haven't shown you the pictures. The first job I had was in a contact centre. I was 20 years old. I dropped out of university, kind of wanted to be a social worker. Back. There. Oh, there. So that one there, that's me, age 20, just having got my first job at BT Group. And I'd done various things because I'd got no money. I'd been a welder. It definitely wasn't like Flashdance, right? It really wasn't. Really wasn't. I'd run a sandwich shop in Cambridge, which I kind of liked. I liked the customers. I liked coming up with ideas. I'd worked for Miss Selfridge. And then I got £5.24 an hour in 1994 working for BT Group. And I thought, well, I'll go and do it for a while. And I'll see how it goes. And actually, I loved it. I travelled to work on a motorbike. I'd got piercings everywhere, right? I hadn't got a career plan. I didn't know what I was doing. Where was I? I've lost my track now. I've gone back to the photos and lost my track. Go back to where, oh, I can do that, can't I? I told you I wasn't a tech. Right, go back one. There we go. No, back one again. Right, okay. So the evidence. The way that I counter my imposter syndrome is to look at the evidence. I didn't go to the right school. I didn't have a degree when I came into the business. I had a real desire to enjoy myself. I don't do boring. To be creative, to use every bit of my intellectual capability. And I love working with people. And that's the evidence. Every single role I've gone into, crises that I've lived through, getting 4,000 people from their office environment to their home environment during the pandemic, every single time I've done it. And I might have stressed and fretted, but every single time I've done it. So the evidence tells me I'm going to make it work in banking. Keep your evidence. Look at the evidence. Don't let the thought dictate. Look at the evidence. And another point to this is, don't have a win, a success, and then just walk away from it and say, oh, well done, and walk away. You need that for your evidence bank. Every time you pull something off and you do something ace, keep a note of it and remind yourself of it, okay? Promise me you'll do that. Okay, there you go. There's my evidence. And this is my lived experience, right? So I've had imposter syndrome. I've not been called to the table. I remember in kind of probably 2001, I was working as a client relationship manager looking after a big company called GlaxoSmithKline, and I was looking after their global telecommunications infrastructure. And it all fell down. It all broke. It was all Cisco's fault, but it all broke, right? Is anybody from Cisco in here? I hope not. And we'd had this technical issue going on for several days, and BT Group was paying a hell of a lot of money to GlaxoSmithKline because their US to UK service was down. It was also impacting things like the third generation antibiotic production, so it was big stuff. And although I wasn't a tech, I had an idea about what could solve this issue. And I told my boss the idea. First time I told him, he didn't even register. He didn't even act as if I'd said anything. My voice wasn't heard at all. The second time I told him in a meeting with more people in it, he said, okay. And I thought, nobody's listening to me here because I'm not a tech and because I'm a girl. Nobody's listening to me. It was a very, very male-dominated environment. And I thought, well, what can I do, right? What can I do? So I did the unthinkable. I gave the idea to a bloke. So there was a guy called Chris Ruo, brilliant man, and he was the technical service manager, and he was equipped in two ways. He was technical and he was a man. In the next, I gave him the idea, and he said, you might be onto something there. I can't even remember the idea now. It was quite technical, she says. And he put the idea forward in a meeting. And everybody said, that's brilliant, Chris. That's absolutely brilliant. Let's try it. And I felt like I'd sold out. I feel emotion now telling you this. I felt like I'd sold out and gone against every feminist principle in my body. But Chris then turned around and said, well, that came from Carla. And she tried to explain it to you twice before, and nobody was listening. So Chris was an ally, right? Chris gave me the credit. Second lived experience, talk about imposter syndrome, I had a boss that did it for me. I worked for a bloke, when I came back from having my first daughter, I worked for a bloke, and he was a nice enough guy, but he was a very political guy, very political, and he went through life with a really cynical view of the world. So to him, people, other people in the business, they weren't people to collaborate with and do brilliant things with, they were the competition. And he used to say to me, you wouldn't survive out there, Carla. You would not survive. You are way too nice. You always think the best of people. You would be eaten alive. And these messages were sustained over a couple of years that I worked for him. And all the time, I was coming up with all his bright ideas. I was doing his work for him. And I was happy with that because I'd got my young daughter and my work-life balance was good and he maintained that. And then he left. No, I left first, actually, and then he left shortly after, interestingly. But what I did hear about him, and I thought, he's told me, he's given me all this messaging that I couldn't survive, I couldn't make it out there, that I'm not savvy enough, that I'm too nice. And I thought, well, I'd rather stay in my brain, my head, and go into the world with an open-hearted approach than be in his head and think that everybody is a threat and everybody is competition. And it wasn't because he was a man, it was just how he thought, right? And I had to really lift myself up from that situation. But now, he went off with a breakdown. He was living stress because every other human he looked at, he was seeing as competition. And actually, competition is something that's really prevalent in male-dominated environments. And coming back to the voice, the imposter syndrome, it isn't surprising that women get that more than men. I was reading a really interesting study from a group called Play Scotland, and they study children playing, and they don't do it because they want to come up with some principles about men and women in the workplace. They do it because they want children to play more. And one of the things that they identified is that when children are playing, girls will be told to be careful at much lower levels on a tree, at much lower rungs on the climbing frame than boys by their parents. So our self-talk kind of starts there. So if you've got daughters, right, let them climb the tree, let them go to the top. But you've got to think about your own voice at the table. And sometimes you will get interrupted. And I've got a whole list of phrases that I use if I'm interrupted or I'm skirted over or I'm not listened to. And they're polite, but they're firm. I don't start with I'm sorry. I start with I hadn't finished that point. I'm quick. Can I finish it? I start with nice ways of saying don't leave me out of the discussion. And I also, because I've got a big organisation, make sure that doesn't happen to anybody in my meetings. Male environments are noisier. Every woman has a duty to watch out, not just for women, but for introverts, but for neurodiverse people that are struggling to get their voices heard at the table. Because this isn't just, the ideas factory doesn't thrive when it's just the ideas of extrovert, male, competitive sports players, right? You don't get the best ideas. So first of all, you belong here. The second thing that's really, really helped me is building allies. You would not believe how many over a 30-year career, allies, sponsors, mentors, mentees, and just the network that I've got. And I hate networking. I absolutely loathe networking. And I think it's designed for men, not women. But I do love working with people, right? So my network is built not from drinking a glass of white wine and eating a curled up sandwich and chatting small talk, but from working with people. My network has done things for me that I would never imagine. I've ended up presenting in the mountains of Zurich, just outside Zurich, not in the city. I've ended up just so many things, right, that my network has helped me with. And I actively look for that network because I think women, when they start affirming other women, that unlocks something massive. So you're all in this great, fabulous network today. Connect with somebody you don't know. Build that network. Because just yesterday, I mentor a finance grad, a young chap, Harry. He's great. And he wants to look at kind of consumer behaviour and futurology. And within about 5 minutes, I was able to put in touch with 4 women that work in that space or have worked in that space. And that is because, one of them was my first ever boss, actually, that became a consultant. So don't underestimate the power of the network. And look to lift other women, look to recognise other women. And the more you go upwards in an organisation, the more accountability you've got to do that. So build this win-win network is everything. And don't just limit it to women, right? I've got brilliant men in my network. There are most amazing people. And I've got a real lived example of this. My first management job, there was a woman called Catherine Hawley. And she was my boss's boss. She was like basically God, right, to me. I was petrified, right? And on my first day in the new job, it was down in Kent, the Canterbury Nuisance Call Bureau. She came to see me and I was bricking it. And I had got long red hair, as you saw from the picture, and I'd put it all up. And she said, oh, you look different. What have you done? I said, well, I've put my hair up so I can look professional. And she said, Carla, we've given you this job because of who you are. Don't go being somebody different, please. And it was one of the wonderful things that she said to me, but one of the most wonderful things that anybody's ever said to me in my entire career. And I've made a point of saying that to others. We gave you this job because of who you are. Please don't try and be somebody else. Okay, and my mentor. My mentor is a woman called Katie Milligan. She won't be my mentor for much longer because obviously I'm off ski. But she's made sure that I've got a place at the table, that I've got a voice in decision making. So do that for other women and find women that can do that for you and men. Because Matt Hemmings, my old boss, was one of the biggest advocates for me that there's ever been. But find that network and use that network. And then I've got a sort of plea for you, really, because I think about my 30 years in business, and it has changed loads, right? When I had my first daughter, I basically had to pretend I didn't have children. And then the pandemic came along, and all the blokes had got their babies on their laps on Teams calls. And I was like, hang on a minute, I've never been able to do that. So it has changed lots in the 30 years. but it's got to continue changing because those prevailing cultural facets still exist in male-dominated environments. They still make it more difficult for women to thrive. And I've given you some very, very quick hacks, thoughts today. But the biggest change is going to come from you. So this is a quote from me now, right? I know it's a bit pompous, right? But I'm going to do it anyway. If you want the world to be more positive, do something positive. Don't just talk about it. Don't come out of this saying, oh, that was really nice. We had a great chat about what it feels like to be in a male-dominated environment. Take action, because the more you take action, the more our daughters and our sons will feel a different environment moving forward. And actually, you know, businesses that reflect the views, the ideas and the creativity of their customer base do better. There's no getting around it. So use your superpowers, build yourself a network, make sure your voice is heard at the table, use your evidence to tackle your self-talk and go out there and do it. And final point, you are all women working in a male-dominated industry, and that makes you two things. That makes you rare and it makes you massively courageous. So turn to the woman next to you and say, well done, missus, because that is massive. You've been brilliant. Thank you very much.